Good afternoon and welcome to Legal Affairs. I'm Stephen Yap, your anchor for this afternoon. In the studio this afternoon we have Mr. Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation. Well, this afternoon's topic we'll be talking about Mr. John Lee, Chief Executive-elect or designate, campaign and the YouTube ban. The YouTube has shut the account of Hong Kong's Chief Executive candidate John Lee over US sanctions taken against the then Secretary for Security over national security law. The YouTube operated by Google closed the account and removed it from the company's website. It is reported that Google complies with applicable US sanction laws and enforces related policies under its terms of service. Now, after review and consistent with these policies, Google terminated the John Lee 2022 YouTube channel. Now, Mr. Ma,
Yes.
What do you think is the main reason or hidden agenda surrounding the removal of John Lee's YouTube account despite US sanctions over the national security law as alleged by the US?
Now let us go through the news first, and then recently there is a news publication that John Lee's YouTube channel has been blocked, and that was as early as in 20th of April. The reason for blocking his account is because he was listed by the US as specially designated nationals, and because he is specially designated national, there is a legal obligation by YouTube to block his account. That's the reason. And if you look for specially designated nationals, you'll be able to find a number of people of familiar faces. Now, those people are people who are responsible for the enactment as well as for the implementation of our very important national security law back in 2020. The national security law actually returned Hong Kong with a stable, calm and peaceful society, which was before that was damaged by Black Hat riots. And many of them, as you can see, they're chief of police, head of the Hong Kong's liaison office, head of the national security office in Hong Kong, our Secretary for Justice, and then you can see Mr. John Lee in the middle. So he is one of the specially designated nationals. Now, for specially designated nationals, Google has a policy that if there is some applicable sanctions initiated by the United States government or by the United States Treasury Department, then Google, as an American company, would have to comply. And then you wonder why Google has anything to do with YouTube. Then the news item will tell you that 15 years ago, Google actually acquired YouTube. So YouTube's broadcasting policy comes under the control and management of Google. So if Google has a policy before to comply with US sanctions, YouTube would have to follow suit. But that being said, your question is, why would the Google ban John Lee? That is a national security reason. Google was actually funded by the spy agency, the CIA, as we all know. Why do you think that CIA would be interested in Google? If you understand, because development of the World Wide Web, there's a lot of information for us. As general users, we would want to pick information and use it for personal and private purposes. But for the CIA, as well as the NSA, which is the National Security Agency of the United States, they started a program back in 1995 because they understand that the World Wide Web has a lot of information. What we wanted to use is different from their perspective. The CIA and the NSA wanted to track down people. What they did is back in 1995, they recruit people from the Stanford University and run a program. These are computer genius. These computer genius include two people. One is called Sergey Brin and the other Larry Page. Now, these two persons are the founders of Google because they received, the founders of Google, they received a grant from the CIA and NSA, and then they created Google. And then the whole purpose of creating Google for the CIA is that the CIA would be able to efficiently track individual users and identify them, so that it is actually they use it as a national security monitoring system to monitor everyone, not just in the United States, but also anyone in the world who use that system. As we all know, if we go onto the Google map, and then there's a whole display, 360-degree display of Hong Kong, every street, every block of buildings, right? So this is the tactical purpose used by the CIA. Of course, and when you understand, CIA is actually a government agency, a government spy agency, which is tailored to comply with America's foreign system. And one of the very secret foreign policy that America has is the China containment theory, which they deny. The China containment theory has a number of fronts, and the media front is a front that they deploy, that they want to use Google, they want to use YouTube, and all this to, for example, initiate a color revolution. For example, in Egypt, they initiated calling for people on Google to access the Facebook, and then they would be able to make up a strike to overthrow the government. That's exactly what happened in Egypt. So Hong Kong's national security law is not liked by the United States because it gives Hong Kong a peaceful society. So in order to minimize the influence of Hong Kong as an international city, the United States policy, they won't tell you, is to minimize Hong Kong's status, is to undermine Hong Kong's status as an international city. So to do that, the first thing is to undermine the chief executive's prominence, to make sure people don't know about him, people don't know about Hong Kong, so Hong Kong would probably disappear on the face of the world on an information perspective.
So the shutting down of John Lee's account, am I correct to say it is an attempt to stifle his election campaign?
Well, that was a thought because they think that would affect the election. But in fact, what we have to understand is Hong Kong's chief executive is not elected by direct elections. We have 7.5 million people. We have about 3 million plus voters. But the chief executive was not directly elected by these 3 million voters. The chief executive is indirectly elected. That means these 3 million voters, some of them would have to vote to elect the election committee members. And there is 1,500 election committee members in the system. And these 1,500 election committee members would be responsible to elect the chief executive. And these 1,500 election committee members, they do not get the news from YouTube. They get the news from Hong Kong televisions, newspapers, radios, and all this. So without watching YouTube, it would not affect at all their decision in who to elect and how to elect. But what is important is because of this ban, Hong Kong's people in the world, in other parts of the world, would not be able to know via YouTube what John Lee wants to say. So it is actually an infringement of the long-established freedom of information principles promoted by the United Nations, because people in the world would have a right to know about what happened in Hong Kong, what is Hong Kong's public policy, what is John Lee's policy going to be, how is it going to affect their interaction with Hong Kong. Would they still want to trade with Hong Kong? Would they still want to come to Hong Kong? What is the residence requirement? Would they still want to deal with Hong Kong? So they would want to know about this policy, and YouTube is now blocking them. So it is actually an action that undermines freedom, the principle of freedom of information of the United Nations.
Mr. Ma, as you're a member of the election committee representing the legal sector, have you read John Lee's policy concerning the law?
Yes. He was wanting to promote Hong Kong as a international or Asian dispute resolution center. That has always been the plan. He is carrying on with that plan. But the problem is we are still stuck with reciprocal recognition of judgments between mainland China and Hong Kong. So this is very, very important, because in order to nurture Hong Kong to be an international or even Asian dispute resolution center, you want foreigners to come to Hong Kong as a place of dispute resolution, so that when Hong Kong has an arbitration or a judgment, that judgment or arbitration award can be enforced back in the mainland China, right? So if our judgment cannot be enforced in the mainland China, because currently there's a lot of hurdles, then it would lessen the attractions that Hong Kong might otherwise have to attract foreigners to come to Hong Kong to have their dispute dealt with in Hong Kong and enforced in the mainland China. If Hong Kong has completed the system of reciprocal recognition of judgment with mainland China litigants would be able to come to Hong Kong to enforce their judgments, and probably also via Hong Kong's judgment to enforce that Hong Kong judgment elsewhere in the world. So this reciprocal recognition of judgments between Hong Kong and China, civil judgments, mainly civil commercial judgments, is very, very important. And I hope that the government would be able to complete and finalize any outstanding arrangements that is still being left undone by the last administration. That would be very important.
So you think that there would be a move towards more reciprocal enforcement of judgments here in Hong Kong? So there will be advanced further. Thank you, Mr. Ma. That is all for today, and thank you for watching Legal Affairs. See you next time.